At 16 Sycamore Lane lived the Greystone family, the kind of family that smiled in every photo, whose windows gleamed, whose lawn was always trimmed just so. Jonathan was a successful attorney at one of the city's top firms, methodical and composed, with a voice that never rose above measured calm. Elise was a literature teacher, beloved by her students, with a gentle voice like a bedtime poem. And Sophie, their teenage daughter, was quiet, intelligent, and beautiful, the kind of girl who read mystery novels instead of going to parties. But there was an absence in that house, a silence that even laughter couldn't quite fill. A room, at the end of the upstairs hallway, had remained locked for years, the room of the son they had lost, just a baby, to complications at birth. Since that day, something between Jonathan and Elise had fractured. Outwardly, they were still perfect. But the cracks, invisible to most, were deep and spreading. It was on a grey Thursday afternoon that Elise received the call. The social worker's voice was careful, formal, but edged with unease. "We found a boy," she said. "He was abandoned in a city park. No ID, no family. He won't say much, but he gave us a name. Caleb." "And why are you calling?" "Me?" Elise asked, puzzled. "You're in our emergency adoption registry, but that's not the only reason. He had your address scribbled on a piece of paper in his pocket." Silence. "That has to be a mistake," Elise whispered. But that evening she told Jonathan everything. There was something in her eyes, not excitement exactly, but hope. A fragile, reckless hope, like a door long closed was quietly unlocking itself. "Maybe we should just meet him, that's all," she said, pouring wine with slightly shaking hands. Jonathan hesitated. He saw something in Elise he hadn't seen in years: life. 2 days later, Caleb arrived. He was 8 years old, but his eyes belonged to someone older. Far older, dark, unblinking, unreadable. His hair was messy and too long, his clothes ill-fitting. He neither cried nor smiled. He just looked, silently, steadily, as if the world was a puzzle he had already solved. "Hi, Caleb," Elise said, kneeling in front of him. "Welcome." He didn't respond. His gaze drifted past her, toward the house, taking in the windows, the roof, the corners. Caleb barely spoke for the first week. He responded with nods, long stares, and deep, oppressive silence. He slept little, and when he did, he muttered in his sleep, strange, guttural sounds that made Sophie press her pillow tighter around her head. Elise insisted it was trauma, that he needed time, love, structure. Jonathan, careful as ever, agreed, though he kept himself emotionally guarded, a habit learned after years of hidden grief. Sophie, though, was uneasy from the start. She couldn't say why. Caleb never looked directly at her, yet she felt watched. One night, she left her room for a glass of water and found him in the hallway, standing completely still, staring at the wall. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice low. He turned his head slowly. A faint smile touched his lips. "The wall breathes." "Here," he said. Sophie stepped back, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "What did you say?" But Caleb was already walking away. Elise began to change. There was a warmth in her again, but it seemed to exist only in Caleb's presence. She cooked his meals with special care, even though he never said what he liked. She read to him, even though he never seemed interested. She hovered near him like a moon pulled by some new gravity. "It's like he's hollow," Sophie told her father one night. "Like he's pretending to be a kid." Jonathan tried to laugh, but didn't. "He's just adjusting," he said. "It takes time. He doesn't feel real." By the 3rd week, the baby monitor in Caleb's room began acting up. Static, distorted voices, scraping sounds. Elise said it was interference. Sophie swore she heard her own name whispered in Caleb's voice. She tried to show Jonathan, but every time they played the recordings back, they sounded normal. Then the family photo disappeared. It was the one over the fireplace, taken 2 years ago, all of them smiling, even Elise. Sophie noticed its absence. Right away. Jonathan said it must have been misplaced. Elise claimed she'd taken it to be reframed, but no one had touched it. And where the frame had been, there was a faint scratch on the wood, just barely visible. It used to be hollow here too. That night, Sophie woke to footsteps in the hallway. She crept out with her phone, camera ready, and saw Caleb standing. Outside the locked nursery of the old baby's room. "Caleb," she whispered. He turned slowly. His eyes seemed dull, like the light from the hallway didn't reach them. "There's something inside," he said. "Something you all forgot." The next morning, Elise unlocked the nursery for the first time in 7 years. She uncovered the furniture, opened the curtains, wiped away the dust. "We'll redecorate," she said brightly to Caleb. "This will be your room now." Caleb stepped in without hesitation. He looked around at the faded blue walls, the dangling mobile, the forgotten toys. "He won't mind," Caleb said. "Who?" Elise asked. Caleb looked at her with the calmest expression she had shown. "The other boy." Caleb's new room had once belonged to a ghost. At least, that's what Sophie told herself. She didn't remember much about her baby brother. She had been only 6 when it happened, but she remembered the silence that followed. The hush that spread through the house like fog. Now the door that had stayed locked for years stood wide open, and Caleb slept under the same ceiling where no one had dared to sleep since the funeral. Except he didn't really sleep. Sophie began noticing it the first week after he moved in. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, she'd hear footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing up and down the hallway. At first she thought it was her father, maybe suffering from insomnia. But Jonathan was always asleep on the couch in his home office. The sound came from Caleb's small, bare feet padding the wooden floor. Sometimes she would open her door and peek out. Caleb would be standing at the end of the hall, facing a corner. Not moving, not speaking, just waiting. Once she caught him in the kitchen. No lights on, just him sitting at the table, staring at the oven. He turned to her when she entered, as if he had been expecting her. "It hums," he said. "What does?" Sophie asked, already regretting the question. "The oven. It hums like it remembers things." She backed away slowly and went upstairs without another word. The air in the house had changed. Jonathan was spending more time away, longer hours at the firm, more weekends claimed by urgent deadlines. When he was home, he spoke less and drank more. Elise, on the other hand, was dissolving into Caleb. She'd begun keeping a journal of the things he said, as if he were some kind of oracle. "He knows things he shouldn't," she whispered to Jonathan one night, voice trembling. Not with fear, but awe. "He told me the baby's name. We never told anyone, not even Sophie." Jonathan stared at her, then at the wineglass in her hand, half empty. "You're tired," he said flatly. "You're seeing patterns where there are none." "I'm not," Elise whispered. "He said the name was Micah." Jonathan said nothing. That was the name. Sophie became obsessed with recording him. She downloaded a voice-activated recorder on her phone and hid it in the hallway at night. She needed proof, not just for her parents, for herself. One morning, she played back a clip from 2:17 a.m., recording soft footsteps, breathing, a faint hum, mechanical, rhythmic. Then a voice. Sophie, her name, whispered, stretched. "They don't see it, but I do." There was something wet in the voice, like it came from under the floor. Sophie ran to show her dad, but when she played it again, all she heard was static. The tension in the house thickened. Caleb's presence no longer felt like a disruption. It felt like gravity. Everything bent around him. Elise began cancelling work. She cooked Caleb's meals with almost ritualistic precision, watched over him like a disciple. Sophie caught her one morning whispering to him while he stared at the wall, "You're special, you were sent to us. I know it now." Caleb didn't respond, but his eyes flickered just once. That same day, Jonathan found his wedding ring in the garbage disposal. "I didn't put it there," he said, holding up the scratched band. "No one did?" Sophie said. "It just ended up there, like the picture, like everything." Later that week, the family cat Dusty disappeared. They searched the house, the yard, the neighborhood. Flyers were made, calls to shelters placed. Nothing. Then, 2 days later, Sophie found Dusty's collar in the garden, buried, half covered in dirt. There were claw marks on the metal tag. Sophie confronted Caleb. "Did you do something to the cat?" He blinked at her slowly. A smile barely touched the corners of his lips. "He went into the wall," Caleb said. "What does that even mean?" He followed the sound. "It's not my fault." Sophie stormed off, but that night she heard meowing behind her bedroom wall. Just once. Soft. Then silence. The final shift came the night the power went out. A thunderstorm had rolled in suddenly, shaking the windows and drenching the street in darkness. The lights flickered, then died. Elise lit candles. Jonathan pretended to read a book. Sophie locked her door. Caleb wandered the halls. At exactly midnight, every door in the house creaked open. Sophie swore she had locked hers. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The hallway was empty, but her phone buzzed, a notification. Recording complete. She hadn't started it. She played it. Recording. Heavy breathing. Floorboards creaking, a whisper. "I was here before him." Sophie froze. Her skin crawled. "This house forgets. I don't." Then the sound of a child's laugh, not Caleb's, younger, higher. The next morning, the power was back. Elise was in the kitchen, humming, baking something for Caleb. Jonathan was gone again. Sophie didn't eat. She couldn't stop thinking about the laugh. She confronted her mother. "There's something wrong with him." Elise didn't turn around. "He's not like other children," she said gently. "But that's because he sees things we've forgotten." Sophie's voice cracked. "Mom, he's dangerous." Elise turned to face her, smiling faintly, but her eyes were hollow. "No, sweetheart, he's a blessing. You just don't understand him yet." Sophie stepped back. Her hands trembled. She went to her room, locked the door, and opened a notebook. On the first page she wrote, "If anything happens to me, it was Caleb." By the time the leaves began to turn and scatter along the sidewalk, the grey stone house no longer felt like a home. It had become something else, something brittle and claustrophobic, like the inside of a sealed jar. Every smile was thinner. Every word felt weighed, and beneath the surface of the routine, something foul and unseen writhed just out of reach. Jonathan stopped sleeping upstairs altogether. He claimed the couch was more comfortable, but everyone knew the truth. He didn't want to pass Caleb's room in the dark. He didn't want to hear what he sometimes heard. Late at night, when the house seemed to hold its breath, Caleb would speak in his sleep, not dreams. Conversations, long, fragmented monologues, always in a low whisper, like someone was listening or answering. Jonathan recorded one of them. He never played it back. Instead, he transferred the file to a flash drive, wrapped it in duct tape, and placed it in his briefcase, beneath legal folders and case files. He didn't want Elise to find. He didn't even want to admit he'd done it, but he did, and ever since that night, he hadn't looked Caleb in the eye. Elise, on the other hand, bloomed in a way that frightened Sophie. Her mother, once pale and quiet, now moved with strange purpose. She spoke often of energy, presence, visions. She had started drawing again, something she hadn't done since before Sophie was born, but the sketches were unsettling. Black. Windows, open mouths, hands pressed against walls. Caleb appeared in many of them. "He's healing this family," Elise said one morning over breakfast, eyes bright with conviction. You might not see it yet, but I do. Every family has a wound. He's closing ours." Sophie stared at her, stunned. By replacing Micah, Elise smiled, and it wasn't kind. No one can replace Micah. But Caleb reminds us that Micah mattered, that he left an opening, an invitation. Sophie felt her stomach drop. Invitation to what? But her mother just went back to stirring tea, humming softly under her breath. That weekend, Sophie found a strange collection hidden under Caleb's bed. Scraps of newspaper, broken buttons, faded photographs. Most of them were unmarked, but one photo made her freeze. It was of her, a school photo from 4th grade. She had never seen this copy before. The edges were singed. She took it to her father. He examined it in silence, then said, "We need to talk." They sat in the office with the door locked, just like old times before Caleb, back when things still felt like they made sense. "I don't think he's just some abandoned boy," Jonathan said slowly. I think he was meant to." "Come here," Sophie frowned. "What do you mean, meant?" Jonathan opened his briefcase, took out the flash drive. "I recorded something one night when Elise was asleep and I heard him talking. He inserted it into the laptop, played the file, recording, a low hum, then a whisper. He doesn't see yet, but he will." Pause, breathing. The man must break. He has to make space. Jonathan paused the file. "That's me," he said. "He was talking about me." Sophie said nothing. Her hands were ice. He pulled something else from his bag. An envelope. Unsealed. Inside was a drawing, childish but detailed. 3 stick figures stood smiling. A 4th lay on the floor, red crayon surrounding its head. "I found this in my briefcase," he said. "Caleb?" Sophie asked. He nodded. "It wasn't there before. He arrived." Later that night, the lights began flickering again. Sophie tried to sleep, but her room felt colder than usual. She pulled the blankets over her head, trying to drown out the tapping coming from the inside of her closet door. Tap, tap, tap. She sat up, heart pounding. The tapping stopped. Then came the whisper. "Micah never left." She screamed. Jonathan rushed in, saw the closet door swinging open, nothing inside, no one. He sat beside her until she stopped shaking. When he rose to leave, Sophie grabbed his hand. "She's falling under him," she said. "Mom, he's got her." Jonathan nodded. "I know, but we need proof, something no one can ignore." The next day, they planted a camera in Caleb's room, hidden inside a stuffed bear. Jonathan wired it to his laptop, set it to record overnight. They told Elise it was a baby monitor. She smiled vaguely, barely listening. When they reviewed the footage the next morning, most of it was normal, until 3:11 a.m. Caleb sat up in bed, eyes wide open, though he had not moved before. His lips began to move, no sound. Then his body jerked forward sharply, like something had pulled him by the spine. He fell to the floor on all fours. The screen flickered. When the image returned, he was standing, facing the bear, smiling and whispering something, mouth forming one clear phrase. "Stop watching." The footage cut to black. Jonathan slammed. The laptop shut. Sophie could barely breathe. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew the whole time." That night, Jonathan told Elise they needed to take a break, that he was going to stay at a hotel for a few days. Elise didn't argue. She simply watched him pack. As he zipped his suitcase, Caleb stood in the doorway. "You won't get far," he said softly. Jonathan didn't look at him. "You don't belong here," he muttered. Caleb tilted his head. "I belong where I'm invited." He turned and walked away. Jonathan left without saying goodbye, and within 2 hours he was back. Sophie opened the door and found him standing in the rain, soaked, dazed, trembling. His suitcase was gone. So were his shoes. "What happened?" she asked. Jonathan looked past her, into the house. I didn't make it to the car." His voice was hollow. "Something turned me around." The day after Jonathan came back from the rain, the house changed again. Not visibly, not in a way you could explain, but the temperature was wrong. The shadows lingered longer in the corners. Light bulbs flickered, even when brand new. Pipes groaned without reason. And at night, the air felt too still, like something was waiting to exhale. Sophie noticed it first in her dreams. She began waking up with soil under her fingernails, not dirt. Soil, damp, cold, black. She checked the backyard, her shoes even, her scalp. Nothing, no explanation. Then the whispers started again. This time, they weren't just outside her room. They were inside her pillow. When she pressed her ear against the fabric, she heard them faintly. Voices arguing in a language she didn't understand. Sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. She stopped sleeping on that pillow. Elise no longer acted like Elise. She had started wearing Micah's old clothes, tiny garments she kept stored in a memory chest Sophie didn't know still existed. One morning, Sophie walked into the kitchen to find her mother rocking in the chair by the window, humming a lullaby, holding nothing in her arms. No Caleb, no doll, just air. "Mom?" Sophie asked. Elise looked up, startled, then smiled. "I was remembering," she whispered. "He was so light in my arms." Sophie said nothing. There was no use arguing anymore. Her mother had surrendered completely. To what? Sophie wasn't sure, but it wore Caleb's face. Jonathan was unraveling too, though he tried to hide it. His hair had grayed at the temples, his clothes were rumpled, and he jumped at every sound. He rarely spoke now, just scribbled in a notebook and drank too much coffee. One afternoon, Sophie glanced over his shoulder and saw a phrase repeated again and again across the page. "What lies underneath?" "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. Jonathan looked at her, eyes bloodshot. "I don't know," he said, "but it's in my head. It's always there, like a drumbeat, like a voice buried in the floorboards." He pointed at the ground. "He brought something with him, Sophie. Or maybe he is it." That night something strange happened. Caleb disappeared, not for long, just for 10 minutes, but that had never happened before. Elise panicked. She searched every room, calling his name with growing hysteria. Jonathan stood still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if he could hear Caleb above them. Sophie joined the search, more out of fear than concern. They found him in the basement. The door had been locked for years, and yet somehow it was wide open. Caleb stood in the center of the room, barefoot, eyes closed, smiling faintly. Around him the floor was etched with deep lines, circles and symbols scratched into the concrete. "What are you doing?" Elise gasped, running to him. "I was listening," he said softly. "To what?" He opened his eyes. "To them. No one slept that night." The next morning, Elise boarded up the basement, but it didn't matter. The house had already opened something, a passage, a memory, a wound, and it was bleeding. From that point forward, strange things began appearing, in unexpected places. A spoon in Sophie's sock drawer, a photograph of a forest that none of them remembered taking, a feather pinned to the ceiling with a nail, and always, always, the same whisper behind it all. Underneath. One evening, as Sophie brushed her hair, she noticed something lodged in her brush. She pulled it free. A baby tooth. Not hers. Not recent. She ran to Jonathan, hands shaking. He placed it on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "I need to show you something." In the attic, behind a panel in the wall, Jonathan had found something days earlier. He hadn't told anyone. Not until now. It was a box. Inside, 3 burnt matches, a lock of black hair, a folded slip of paper, and a doll with its eyes stitched. "Shut!" Sophie unfolded the paper. One word written in red ink. "Below." "What is this?" she whispered. Jonathan swallowed. I think whoever lived here before us tried to bury something, seal it. He looked down at the box, and I think Caleb found it. Sophie confronted him that night. She found him alone, in the nursery, staring out the window at nothing. The room smelled of dust and iron. The mobile above the crib spun slowly, though there was no breeze. "Who are you?" she asked. Caleb didn't look at her. "I'm the reminder." "Of what?" He finally turned his head. "Of what gets forgotten, of what stays, of what never really leaves." She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You're not a boy." He smiled. "No," he said. "Not anymore." Silence stretched between them. Then he whispered, "You should ask your father about the land." Sophie did. That night, as Jonathan, and poured whiskey into a chipped glass, she repeated what Caleb had said. Jonathan froze. Then he sat down. "This house was built over something," he said slowly. "Old foundations. There was a church here once, burned down over a century ago." "A church?" Sophie asked. He nodded. "A revivalist cult. They called themselves the Hollow Ones, believed the earth had mouths, that if you fed it what it wanted, it would whisper back." He took a drink. "They say the fire started during one of their ceremonies. They were trying to summon memory. Everyone inside died." Sophie's skin crawled. "Did Mom know?" "No," he said. "And don't tell her. She's too far. Gone." Sophie stood slowly. "What if Caleb didn't come to us?" Jonathan looked up. "What if something sent him?" Sophie started the next day by pulling up the floorboards. She didn't tell Jonathan, didn't ask for tools. She waited until the house was silent. Elise out for groceries. Caleb curled up in front of the TV, pretending to be normal. She locked her bedroom door, moved her dresser aside, and pried at the seams between the boards with a screwdriver. They groaned like something waking. The first one came up with ease. Beneath it, insulation, dust, and an odor that made her stomach twist. Moisture, rot, something vaguely metallic. She removed 3 more, then stopped. There was something carved beneath them. Symbols, identical to the ones she'd seen in the basement around Caleb. Circles within circles, hooks, a vertical eye. She took a photo, uploaded it to a symbology site. The closest match, archaic Enochian seals, protection against entities of memory. She sat back, heart pounding. Someone had tried to protect this house long before they moved in, and now, whatever the seal, was meant to hold back. Caleb had already stepped over it. That night the sounds changed. For weeks the whispers and hums had stayed vague, distant. Now they were clear, sharp, as if the house had finally decided to speak. Sophie sat up in bed at 2:42 a.m., heart racing. From the hallway came the unmistakable sound of something dragging. Not footsteps, dragging. She opened her door slowly. No one. But the smell hit her instantly. Earth, sweat, mildew. She followed the sound to the linen closet where the floorboards had always creaked strangely. She opened the door, pushed towels aside, and saw it, a new gap between the boards, fresh dirt beneath. She knelt, heart hammering, and shined her phone flashlight into the opening. It didn't show depth, just black, as if light refused to enter. Then something moved down there, a blink, a ripple, a shape that didn't belong. Sophie scrambled back, slammed the door, and ran. The next morning, she told Jonathan. Instead of disbelief, he looked relieved, as if confirmation had been the only thing he was waiting for. "I was right," he muttered. "I knew it wasn't just Caleb. He's not the cause, he's the channel." They pulled up the closet floor that afternoon. Carefully, methodically, beneath the boards, a circular hole. Shallow at first, then sloping down, too far to see the bottom. The smell rising from it was unbearable, buried at the edge. Bones. Small. Animal, mostly. But one. Jonathan picked it up with gloved hands, stared at it. Human, he whispered. Child-sized. Sophie gagged. She wanted to stop, but something compelled them both to keep digging. By nightfall, they'd unearthed a strange platform, stone etched with markings. In the center was an indentation, round, the size of a small bowl, a crude offering dish. There were old stains around it, brown, dried blood. Jonathan sat back pale. They were feeding it, he said. The hollow ones, Sophie asked. He nodded. They weren't worshipping something imaginary. They were trying to keep it asleep. He looked at her, and Caleb woke it up. When Elise returned home and saw what they'd uncovered, she didn't scream. She smiled. I always knew this house was special, she whispered. Sophie stared in disbelief. You knew this was here? I felt it, Elise said. I felt the weight, the ache. This house has a soul, Sophie. Caleb's just helping us remember. You sound insane, Sophie muttered. Elise turned to her. No, I sound reborn. That night, Jonathan tried to burn the stone platform. He poured lighter fluid across it, struck a match, and the flame sputtered out before it touched. Tried again. Same result. I don't think fire works here, he muttered. Sophie didn't respond. She was staring into the pit again. It was deeper now. She was sure of it. She whispered, It's hungry. Jonathan looked at her sharply. What? She blinked, as if waking up. I don't know why I said that. Later, Sophie found a journal, hidden in Caleb's dresser. Not drawings, not notes, but names, dozens of them. Micah, Eli, Thomas, Clara, Andrew. Names she didn't recognize. All crossed out at the very bottom. Sophie, not crossed out, just waiting. She confronted him in the living room, journal in hand. Who are these people? Caleb didn't look up from his puzzle. They lived here before. What happened to them? He slid a piece into place, smiled. They listened. To what? To underneath. She slapped the book down. Stop talking in riddles. He finally looked at her. Eyes too old, too deep. There is no riddle, Sophie. Just memory. The earth remembers. Remembers what? Caleb leaned forward. That you promised it. What are you talking about? You were 6. You stood in this house and cried. You said you'd give anything to see Micah again. Anything. She went cold. That moment, vague, distant, flickered in the back of her mind. I didn't mean it, she whispered. Caleb tilted his head. But it heard you. That night, she dreamed of Micah. He stood in the hallway, same pajamas he was buried in, face soft, eyes empty. He reached for her. When she took his hand, it crumbled. She woke, screaming. In the silence afterward, she heard the voice from under the floor. One more. The house had stopped pretending. Gone were the faint flickers, the subtle whispers, the soft taps behind the walls. Now it groaned with purpose. Floorboards pulsed underfoot like veins. Doors opened without wind. The clocks had stopped. All of them. At 3:11 a.m., the hour Caleb always rose from bed, the hour the pit beneath the house sighed awake. Sophie knew it was time. Something had been set in motion the day Caleb arrived, maybe even before, and now it was finishing what had been promised. One more, just one more. Jonathan no longer slept. He sat in the armchair in the living room, shotgun across his lap, eyes bloodshot and dry. He had aged years in weeks. Every sound made him flinch. I dreamed of Micah last night, he told Sophie, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked me to let go, said I was holding the door open. Sophie crouched beside him. I think it was a lie, Jonathan nodded. Me too. Outside, the trees bent unnaturally in the wind. Inside, Caleb sang nursery rhymes, out of tune, too slow. Sophie had one final idea, the journal of names Caleb had kept. It was more than a record. It was a ritual, a progression, everyone who had lived in the house before them, Everyone who had fed the pit beneath, knowingly or not. Each name crossed out after their offering was accepted, but hers, still untouched, still pending. She flipped to the back page. One word had been added in Caleb's spidery hand. Tonight. Elise spent the evening in the nursery, rocking in the dark, humming songs that hadn't been sung since Sophie was a baby. She refused to eat, refused to speak. When Sophie entered the room, Elise didn't even look up. "He's going to give us peace," she whispered. "Who is?" Sophie asked. Elise finally turned her head. Her eyes were swollen, glassy. "Micah," she said. "He sent Caleb. He chose this." Sophie felt her throat tighten. "No," she said. "Micah died. This thing isn't him." Elise's face twisted. In grief and fury, "Then why does he still call for me?" Sophie left without another word. At midnight, Sophie made a decision. She would go into the pit, alone. She had to see it. She had to face whatever lived beneath, whatever fed on grief. Promises and blood. She had no plan beyond that. Just a certainty that it would not stop unless someone interrupted the pattern. She packed a flashlight, rope, and a kitchen knife, taped the journal to her chest. She waited until the house was quiet. Then she pried open the boards. The pit was waiting, still, black. Breathing, she lowered herself slowly, the rope tied to a ceiling beam. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade, but it couldn't reach the bottom. 10 feet, 15. Then her feet touched something solid. Stone. She turned the light slowly. The chamber below the house was massive, circular, ancient. The walls were carved with faces, not drawn, formed, as if people had screamed into stone and been frozen there. Some wept, some grinned. At the center of the room stood a slab, and on the slab lay a body, Micah, perfect, preserved. Eyes closed, lips parted slightly like he was asleep. Sophie staggered forward. "Micah." He didn't move. She touched his cheek. It was cold, and then he opened his eyes. But they weren't Micah's. They were Caleb's. "Above!" Jonathan screamed. The rope pulled tight. Sophie looked up, too late. Caleb stood at the edge of the pit, holding the rope in both hands, smiling. "You wanted to see," he said. "Now you'll remember." He let go. Sophie fell. The light shattered. Darkness swallowed her. She didn't die. She woke on the slab, alone. Micah was gone. So was the knife. But something was in the dark, breathing with her, around her. She sat up, slowly, and a voice, many voices, spoke at once. "You broke the pattern." "Who are you?" she whispered. "We are what remains." "Of what?" "Grief, memory, promises." She stood, heart pounding. "You can't have me," she said. A pause, then, "No, we already have you." 1,000 images rushed into her mind, flashes of every family who had lived in the house, who had offered their dead, who had sealed their pain under floorboards and called it healing. And Sophie understood. The pit didn't feed on life. It fed on mourning, on what people were willing to give up to forget, and Caleb was its messenger. She screamed. The walls did not echo it back. Above, she heard footsteps. Jonathan, then Elise, then Caleb, and then silence. For a moment, Sophie thought it was over, until a rope dropped beside her. Caleb's voice floated down. "Come home, Sophie." She didn't move. He tugged the rope. "Your family is waiting." She said nothing. Instead, she reached for the wall, scraped her nails into the stone, and wrote her name. Sophie. Then crossed it out. The ground trembled. The voices screamed, and above, she heard Caleb yell, "No!" The house collapsed at 3:11 a.m. Neighbors said it folded inward, as if the ground swallowed it whole. No bodies were recovered, no pit was ever found. Just one thing lying atop the rubble, a journal, open to the last page, all names crossed out, the last word written in blood-red ink. Enough.